Hello, and welcome to our webinar today. We'll just wait a couple of moments because there might be some more people joining, and then we'll get going. People are still joining, so I'll just wait a moment or two and make sure my phone is off. That would be embarrassing. Okay. Well, as I said, hello and welcome to our webinar today. If this is your first time joining one of our webinars, my name is Sarah Gray, and I'll be taking you through all things AI and how this is impacting on HR. Not just in the way that we use it ourselves, but also addressing the perception of AI within your teams and how many disgruntled employees are now using it. At the end of the webinar, you'll be sent a copy of the recording, so no need to take notes unless, of course, you want to. If you have questions throughout the session, please pop them in the chat. I may see them, and if I do, I'll respond to them. If not, what we will do is collate a Q&A at the end, and we will send that out as a transcript with the recording, so you have a copy of not only your question, but anybody else's and our response. Throughout today's webinar, I will also be asking you to join in some quick polls. There's only a few of them, and if you can respond to those, that would be fantastic. All right, so let's get started. I know AI is very much front of mind for many of you. There is a lot of emphasis about embracing it to enhance operational efficiency. My objective today is to help you do that confidently and avoid the potential legal, ethical, and employee issues that can sometimes arise. AI isn't coming to the workplace. It's already here. Around 1 in 4 UK businesses were using AI at the end of 2025, and obviously there are substantially more using it now on a daily basis. It's interesting that only 4% of the businesses that currently use AI are reporting that it's reduced their headcount. So this helps counter one of the most common fears that AI is replacing jobs, and it's more about AI augmenting work rather than eliminating roles. Now, here's our first little poll. If you can respond, please. How often do you currently use AI for HR tasks? Is it never, occasionally, weekly, daily, or constantly? Looks like occasionally is winning out, or daily. And a few never. That's interesting. And nobody constantly. Perfect. Thank you very much for that. That helps put things into context. Let's start by looking at where AI is actually showing up in HR today. And I suspect most of you will recognize some of these examples. If we look at employees first, the biggest area we're seeing AI used is undoubtedly recruitment. I recently recruited for an HR administrator role and received about 117 applications, I think it was. And I'd estimate quite conservatively that around 95% of those have been written or significantly enhanced by AI. Now, that's not necessarily a criticism. It's just the reality now. A candidate can upload their CV, paste in your job advert, and type something like, "Using my CV and this job advert, write me a compelling covering letter that gives me the best chance of getting an interview at Sintra." And within about 30 seconds, it produces a polished, tailored covering letter. It'll even go off and have a little look around your website and find out what your organization does, mention your values, drop in a few facts about your business, and explain why they've dreamed of working for you since they were 6 years old, which is impressive considering they probably never heard of you 5 minutes earlier. It'll then suggest improvements to their CV as well. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with candidates presenting themselves in the best possible light. The challenge for employers is making sure that we're assessing the person, not just assessing how good they are at prompting ChatGPT or any other AI. The other trend we've noticed is what I call the overnight employment lawyer phenomenon. You'll have an employee who's perhaps never written more than a 2-line email in their life before. And suddenly you receive a 5-page grievance quoting legislation, case law, implied contractual terms, natural justice, and discrimination principles. Managers ring us saying, "Sarah, I've just received this. I think I'm going to end up in tribunal." The reality is the employee hasn't suddenly become an employment law lawyer. They become someone who knows how to ask AI to write like one. Now, let's look at employers. And the truth is, we're doing exactly the same thing. HR teams are using AI daily to improve wording, to draft letters, to rewrite policies into plain English, to change the tone of communication, to draft employee announcements, to prepare presentations. And yes, this webinar included, and don't worry, but though I did write the jokes, but it is brilliant for calculations too. So things like pro rata salaries, percentage increases, holiday calculations, Excel formulas, report writing, the list goes on. Those jobs that used to take 20, 30, 60 minutes now often can take 2, 5, 10. And then we move into something even more valuable, using AI as a thinking partner. So questions like, how do I start a difficult conversation about poor performance with somebody who's very timid? How can I support an employee whose partner has just received a terminal diagnosis? Can you give me some ideas before I speak to them? Or perhaps the most common question that our HR team sees, help, I've just received this grievance, how on earth do I respond? And that really brings us to the key point. Both employees and employers are using exactly the same technology. The difference isn't who uses AI, it's how they use it. And throughout the session, that's what we're really going to explore. Now, this is what we often end up with. AI versus AI. And I have to give credit to AI for this image that I asked it to create for this purpose. It's like the 2026 version of Robo Wars. You've got an employee using AI to build the strongest possible grievance and an employer using AI to draft the strongest possible response. They're both using exactly the same technology. They're just standing on opposite sides of the argument. And here's a really important thing to understand about AI. AI isn't a judge. It isn't an investigator. It isn't an employment tribunal. It doesn't sit there thinking, hang on, are you sure that's what actually happened? It works only from whatever information it's given. So if an employee tells AI, my manager has bullied me, AI says, right then, let's write the strongest grievance we possibly can to teach that manager a lesson. If an employer says, this employee's performance has been really poor, AI says, no problem, let's draft the strongest capability letter we can. It isn't independently verifying the facts. It isn't interviewing witnesses. It isn't even asking awkward questions. It's simply helping each person present their version of events as persuasively as possible, which means AI has some significant limitations. It doesn't fact check, it doesn't know what information's being left out, it doesn't understand the history of the working relationship, it doesn't see body language, it doesn't understand personalities, it doesn't recognize that there may be misunderstandings, emotion, or nuance sitting behind what's being written. And perhaps most importantly, it doesn't have emotional intelligence. So, this is where HR still matters, because good HR isn't just about producing well written documents, as we all know, it's about asking, have we heard both sides? What evidence do we actually have? What's a fair and reasonable outcome in this situation? How is this likely to land with the people who are involved? Those are human judgments. They're not AI judgments. So when someone asks me about whether AI is going to replace HR, my answer is always the same. AI can help us write. AI can help us analyze. AI can help us think, but it can't replace empathy and it can't replace judgment. And it certainly can't replace the ability to navigate difficult human conversations. That's still our job. Another quick poll, please. Have you received a complaint or grievance from an employee that you believe has been generated by AI? Let's give you a moment to answer that one. Oh, almost half and half at the moment. Okay, and let's go to my next question, please. If you answered yes to the last poll, the big question, and please be honest, did you use AI to respond to that complaint or letter? So yes, partially, or no. Great. As I would expect, a lot of people use it, not necessarily for the whole response, but certainly to give them some ideas. And interestingly, that some of you have said no outright. So good on you. So let's look now about where is the real value in AI. For me, it's actually very simple. AI is brilliant at helping us prepare. It's much less good at helping us decide. That's the distinction I'd encourage every one of you to remember. If AI is helping you to become more efficient, fantastic. If it's replacing your judgment, that's when the alarm bells should start to ring. So let's start with the good examples. Using AI to draft communications, absolutely. It'll often give you a better first draft than staring at a blank screen for 20 minutes. Summarizing meetings, fantastic. Most of us don't particularly enjoy writing pages of meeting notes, so let AI produce a summary and then simply check it for accuracy. Brainstorming ideas. This is one of my favorite uses. Sometimes I don't want AI to give me the answers. I just want to use it to make me potentially think differently. So structuring training materials, creating interview questions, all of these save time without taking away your responsibility to exercise professional judgment. They're examples of AI acting as an assistant, I should say, not a decision maker. Now, let's look at the other side. There are some things I don't believe AI should ever be deciding. So things like, should this employee receive a disciplinary warning? Should Joe be selected for redundancy? Who shall I offer the job to? Is this witness more credible than that witness? Is this person genuinely capable or incapable of performing their role? Or does this person's disability really have a negative impact on their job performance? Those aren't administrative tasks. They're human judgments. And they require context, they require evidence, they require experience, empathy, and sometimes instinct, and often a difficult conversation. AI simply is not equipped to do that. So I always encourage people to think of AI as a very capable junior assistant. It's incredibly bright, it works incredibly quickly, it never gets tired, and has read more documents than any of us ever will. But it has no life experience. It doesn't understand your culture. It wasn't in the meeting. It hasn't seen the body language, and it doesn't know who burst into tears halfway through the conversation. It only knows what you choose to tell it. So my rule of thumb is this: use AI to help you write, help you organize, help you research, and help you challenge your thinking, but never allow it to replace your judgment, because ultimately AI helps make us better HR professionals. It shouldn't become the HR professional. One area where I become particularly nervous is when AI starts making disciplinary recommendations. Now, don't get me wrong, using AI to help you draft an invitation letter, summarize a witness statement, or even structure an outcome letter, absolutely all fine. But asking AI, should I dismiss this employee? That's a very different question, because disciplinary decisions are ultimately about judgment, and judgment is thankfully still a human skill. Why? Because every disciplinary decision has to balance three things: the evidence, the context, and what's reasonable in all the circumstances. And as I've said before, AI only knows what you've told it. It wasn't present during the investigation. It didn't interview the witnesses. It didn't observe the people's reactions. It doesn't know the history between manager and employee. It simply processes the information that's been typed into the prompt. And if that information is incomplete, its recommendation will be incomplete too. So the one thing AI simply can't assess is credibility. If you imagine two witnesses giving completely different accounts of the same incident, we've all been there, as HR professionals, we'd start asking questions. Who has first-hand knowledge? Whose version is supported by other evidence? Has either person's story changed over time? How do they come across in giving that information? Were there inconsistencies? AI can't look someone in the eye. It can't spot hesitation. It can't recognize when something just doesn't quite add up. That's our human judgment. Another issue is inconsistency. Another issue is consistency, I should say. People often say, surely AI makes disciplinary decisions more consistent. Well, yes, but consistency and fairness aren't the same thing. Treating everyone exactly the same can actually be unfair. Fairness means recognizing that different people sometimes need different consideration. So someone with 10 years exemplary service may deserve a different outcome from someone with 3 weeks service for the same offence. Someone whose conduct was influenced by disability may require reasonable adjustments rather than disciplinary action. Someone who made an honest mistake shouldn't necessarily be treated the same as someone who deliberately ignored the rules. So consistency is important, but fairness is what employment tribunals are most interested in. And then there's the issue of proportionality. So one of the questions we ask ourselves in HR is dismissal really proportionate here? Could further training resolve the issue? Would a written warning achieve the same outcome? Are there mitigating circumstances? Has the employee accepted responsibility? Could a reasonable adjustment remove the problem altogether? Those aren't mathematical calculations born out of some algorithm. They are value judgments. And AI isn't capable of weighing proportionality in the way an experienced manager or HR professional can. Perhaps my favorite analogy is this, and you know me, I've got to love an analogy. Imagine driving your car. Your sat nav says turn right. Unfortunately, it's the wrong way down a one-way street. When the police stop you, you don't get to say, wasn't my fault. Sat nav told me to do it. You're still responsible for the decision that you made. And AI is exactly the same. If you dismiss somebody because AI recommended it, you can't stand up in front of an employment tribunal and say, well, ChatGPT told us that was the right outcome. Tribunal won't be interested. The legal responsibility sits firmly with the employer. AI doesn't carry the liability. You do. And finally, there is the risk of discrimination. AI doesn't know whether information is missing. It doesn't know whether a disability has affected somebody's conduct. It doesn't understand menopause, autism, ADHD, pregnancy, mental health, or caring responsibilities unless someone has explicitly explained the relevance. And even then, it isn't necessarily applying legal judgment. As employers, we're under a duty to consider reasonable adjustments, objective justification, and fairness. And those legal responsibilities can't be outsourced to AI. So the advice is straightforward. And apologies if I'm sounding like I'm repeating myself. Use AI to help you prepare. Use AI to help you think. Use AI to challenge your reasoning. But when it comes to disciplinary outcomes, the decision should always belong to a human being. One area where I think AI has made me personally more effective is communication. Not because I can't write or be creative in my thinking, but because AI makes me stop and think, who am I actually talking to? The message may stay exactly the same, but the way you deliver that message can make all the difference. So let's look at an example. Imagine your business is introducing a new sickness absence policy. You're sending exactly the same information to two different groups. One is your finance team, the other is a warehouse team where English may not be everyone's first language. Should those two communications look identical? They could, but probably not. Your finance team might appreciate more detail, background, and explanation. Your warehouse colleagues might benefit from shorter sentences, plain English, practical examples, and less technical language. The policy hasn't changed. The audience has. And AI is brilliant at helping you adapt your communication messaging without changing the underlying message. Or it helps you think about your own communication style. I mean, some of us, and I'm sure we've all worked with someone like this, are naturally quite direct and can be a bit blunt. And hands up. We write emails that go straight to the point, but perhaps don't come across as particularly warm. We've all received emails that make us think, well, that must have sounded different and friendlier in their head than it did when it landed in my inbox. AI is fantastic for this. So you can simply ask, can you rewrite this email to sound warmer, more supportive and encouraging without changing the meaning? Or if you are completely the other way, you can say, can you make this more concise, make it sound more collaborative, reduce the jargon, write this so that somebody without any HR knowledge can easily understand it. Those are all brilliant uses of AI. It's also incredibly useful when morale is low. So imagine if your organization has just gone through a difficult period, perhaps redundancies or restructuring, poor financial results, or just simply a few really challenging months. You need to communicate honestly, but you also want people to feel reassured, motivated, and valued. AI can actually help you find that balance. It can suggest a language that's empathetic without sounding insincere. positive without sounding unrealistic, professional without feeling cold. It's all about how you prompt it. Another thing I use AI regularly for is to challenge my own communication. So I'll often paste in a draft and say, if you were an employee reading this for the first time, what questions would you still have? That helps me realize what I've left out potentially. Or is there anything in this email that could potentially be misunderstood? That's incredibly valuable. Not because AI knows the answer, but it helps me see my communication through someone else's eyes. The other feature I particularly like is asking for options. So rather than asking AI to write one email, I'll sometimes say, can you produce me 3 versions? One that's formal, businesslike, one that's conversational, and one that's motivational. I'll look at them and I'll take the best bits from each, combine them into something that really works for me. And I think whilst it's not writing for me, it's actually helping my communication. Sorry, I've just lost my place here. Bear with me. One of the areas where AI can genuinely save HR teams a huge amount of time is during investigating and grievance hearings. AI can produce a transcript and meeting notes almost instantly, removing the need for someone to spend hours typing them up afterwards. That means cases can move forward much more quickly because notes are immediately available for review and for follow-up. In many cases, AI produces a more complete and accurate record than a manual note taker because it's less likely to miss key points while someone is concentrating on writing. Modern tools are increasingly good at also recognizing different accents and speaking styles, making it very practical for diverse workplaces as well. And having an objective record can reduce later disputes about what was or wasn't said during the meeting. But perhaps the biggest benefit is that the chair no longer has to divide their attention between leading the meeting and taking notes. That's one thing I've never been particularly good at. They can focus on listening, asking questions, and managing the conversation a lot more effectively. So overall, it significantly reduces the administration burden on HR, allowing more time to focus on analysing the evidence and reaching fair decisions. AI note-taking is perfectly acceptable, provided it is used transparently and responsibly. So tell people in advance. Don't surprise employees by suddenly switching on an AI recorder in the meeting. Let them know beforehand that AI note-taking will be used. And this should be outlined in your invite letter. Obtain agreement, important. Explain the process at the start of the meeting and give everyone the opportunity to ask questions about it before the recording begins. Be transparent. Tell participants exactly why you're recording, what the notes will be used for, who will see them, and how long they'll be kept. And of course, allow corrections. AI is very good, but it's not perfect. Give everyone the opportunity to review the notes and suggest factual corrections if someone has been misunderstood. And don't keep recordings longer than necessary. Once the transcript or notes have been agreed, consider deleting the recording unless there is a genuine business reason to retain it. And of course, protect the data. These recordings often contain highly sensitive personal information, so they should be stored securely with access limited to only those who genuinely need it. A short recap: use AI to help you become more efficient, but don't use it to replace human judgment. Now let's focus a bit on recruitment, which is another area where AI can add enormous value, provided, of course, we use it properly. Let's start with the job ad. Historically, many organisations have simply copied the old ad they used 5 years ago. They've changed salary, they've changed the closing date, they've advertised exactly the same thing again. AI gives us the opportunity to do something much better. But rather than asking AI to write a job ad, like, just write me a job ad for this particular job, I'd encourage you to start by describing your ideal candidate. What knowledge do they need? What skills are genuinely essential? What behaviours will make somebody successful? What experience is actually required? And just as importantly, what experience have we traditionally asked for that perhaps isn't really necessary? The last question is often where AI can challenge our thinking. But this is where your prompt becomes incredibly important. If I simply ask, write me a job ad for a payroll manager, I'll get a fairly generic advertisement. But if I upload our competency framework, our organisational values, our equality, diversity and inclusion policy, and perhaps our recruitment policy, I can ask AI something much more powerful. Something like, please draft a job advertisement based on the attached competency profile. Ensure the ad reflects our organisational values, aligns with our EDI policy, uses inclusive language, focuses on skills rather than unnecessary experience, avoids gender-coded or potentially discriminatory wording, and encourages applications from a diverse range of candidates. Now, that's a much better use of AI. And remember, AI will faithfully amplify whatever you give it. If you feed it a poor brief, you'll get a poor advert. AI doesn't create bias from nowhere. It often reflects the assumptions contained within the information it receives. So if your prompt says something like, we're looking for a young, energetic salesperson, AI will probably reinforce that language. If your prompt says, focus on competencies, remove unnecessary barriers, and reflect our inclusive culture, you'll usually get a much stronger result. So don't just ask AI to write an ad, teach it what good looks like first. The same applies to interview questions. One of my favorite uses is asking AI to generate competency-based interview questions. You can upload the job description, you can upload the person specification, your competency framework, and then ask AI to suggest behavioural interview questions. Even better, ask it to generate a scoring guide. What would an excellent answer look like? What would an acceptable answer look like? What might indicate concern? This creates much greater consistency between interviewers if you're using more than one. In this situation, notice what AI isn't doing. It isn't deciding who gets the job. It isn't scoring the candidates. It isn't deciding who progresses to interview. It's simply helping us prepare a better recruitment process. The decisions still belong to people. One word of caution though, be very careful if you're using AI to screen or rank CVs automatically. Because if the algorithm has been trained on biased data or you've accidentally built bias into your criteria, it may consistently disadvantage certain groups of candidates. And there's been a few cases of this already. And because AI often appears so confident, there's a temptation to assume it must be right. But trust me, it isn't. It still needs human oversight. So the recommendation is this: use AI to improve your recruitment process, use it to make your ads more inclusive, use it to produce better interview questions, but use it to challenge your assumptions, not make the decisions. Because at the end of the day, you are recruiting a person, not the best AI score. So let's do a bit of a recap on some of the risks that you need to manage. AI has enormous potential to improve recruitment. I think we've spoken about that now. And as we've just seen, help better ads, more inclusive job descriptions, generate competency-based interviews, improve consistency, save time. But like every powerful tool, it does come with risks. Now, we've touched on most of these already, but they're worth keeping front of mind. Algorithmic bias. If biased assumptions go into prompts, the underlying data, biased outcomes will come out. Indirect discrimination. Well-intentioned screening criteria can unintentionally disadvantage particular groups if we don't stop to ask, is this requirement genuinely necessary? Hidden decision-making. One of the biggest dangers with AI is that people stop questioning the recommendations. AI says, these are your top 5 candidates. You say, fantastic. Nobody asks why. Disability considerations. AI won't naturally ask itself, could this behavior be linked to ADHD? Has menopause influenced performance? Should reasonable adjustments be considered? Those questions come from experienced managers and HR professionals. Over-reliance on keywords. Some exceptional candidates simply don't use the right words. Others know exactly how to optimize their CV for AI. Recruitment should always be about capability, not about who has become the best prompt engineer in AI. And AI-generated applications, as we discussed earlier, we're increasingly interviewing beautifully written applications rather than the person behind them. And that's why good interviewing skills have never been more important than they are today. And finally, and an important one, legal challenge. If an unsuccessful candidate asks, how was this decision reached? You need to be able to explain it. You need evidence, you need reasoning, and you need to demonstrate, importantly, that a human ultimately made that decision. Which brings me to one of the most important messages of today's webinar. Don't become frightened of AI, become thoughtful about AI. One of the biggest misconceptions I've heard about AI is that the technology itself is the risk. And actually, most of the risk comes from the information we choose to put into it. Think about it. If I ask AI, can you improve this email? There's very little risk. But if I paste in an employee's grievance, complete with their name, their medical history, their salary, their manager's name, witness statements, client details, now we've entered into a very different world. So let's think about some everyday examples. Imagine you've just finished a disciplinary investigation. You open ChatGPT and type, please review this investigation report and tell me whether you think dismissal is appropriate. And then you paste in the entire report. You've potentially disclosed employee names, witness names, medical information, disability details, performance history, sometimes customer information, sometimes commercially sensitive information. The other point I'd make is that not all AI tools are equal. There is a huge difference between using a free public AI tool and using an enterprise AI platform that's been approved by your organization, that has contractual safeguards in place and doesn't use your prompts to train future models. So always know what environment you're working in. So the advice is, I think, quite simple. Before you press enter, ask yourself 3 questions. Do I need to include this information? Could I anonymize it? Would I be comfortable explaining this to the employee or my data protection officer, or worse, the Information Commissioner's office? If the answer to that last question is no, don't press enter. I actually asked AI this question. If I pasted in a disciplinary report that included personal data how would this become public? If someone typed in the name of the person in the report and the company, is it likely that information from this report that I loaded up could be referenced? ChatGPT said, generally, no. Now, I'm not sure about you, but I don't like that word generally. It said that it would not retrieve or reveal a disciplinary report that another user had previously pasted or posted into ChatGPT, as ChatGPT is not designed to operate as a searchable database or previous users' conversations, and conversations are isolated from one another. So the risk is not necessarily that another random person will type in the employee's name that you've put in and suddenly see your disciplinary report. So what's the GDPR risk, you ask? The risk is about what happens to the data after you submitted it and whether you've processed that personal data lawfully under GDPR. So, for example, you may have disclosed personal data to a third party. When you paste personal information into an external AI service, you are disclosing that information to another organization that is processing it. So even if nobody else ever sees the information, you still disclosed it to another processor. And another thing, free AI tools may retain prompts. So many free AI services historically retain prompts for purposes such as improving the model for quality assurance, detecting abuse, and monitoring security. And humans working for those AI services may access those prompts. So they're not entirely autonomous. So depending on the provider and the circumstances, authorized personnel may review AI prompts for, as I said, security investigations, abuse detections, debugging, or product improvement where it might be appropriate. But enterprise products, enterprise AI, typically have much stronger contractual controls around this. As you would all be aware, special category data has even more protection. So imagine asking AI, how should I deal with this employee? And then providing details of their name, it might be a gender reassignment, about their mental health, or any other condition. That's not just personal data. That is special category data, and it carries much greater protections, as you know, under UK GDPR. So let's think less about will ChatGPTs tell someone else, and more about, did I have the right to upload this information in the first place? Change of emphasis. The next thing is to ensure that you have a solid AI policy. You can't discipline someone about incorrect use of AI if you don't have a published policy that has instructed them on what AI tools are approved by your business. I'll talk you through more about an AI policy in a moment. Train your employees and particularly your managers on how to use AI. And you're welcome to share this webinar or slide deck with them if you think it will help. And finally, if you are using AI to record meetings, transcribe notes, etc., as I said before, tell everyone involved and give them an option to decline. The most important takeaway here, as I said before, is that free tools are higher risk. I'm sure your IT gurus will help guide you and support you in this. I won't read through this slide, but it's there for you to refer to if you need it. I mentioned the importance of an AI policy before. An AI policy is a great way to put some guardrails in place. Let's be honest, AI is not going away. So banning it altogether is totally unrealistic and probably self-defeating. It would be like banning the use of sat-nav in company cars. So having a policy that provides clear guidance is a key to good governance. And it's not just about telling them what they cannot do. It should also provide ideas and guidance on positive usage. So the policy should set clear boundaries on what information should never be uploaded, what AI platforms are approved for use, and what level of human review is expected. We've recognised that this is an area that many employers are grappling with, and as part of our HR service, we've developed a practical AI policy that organisations can adapt to reflect your own business culture and approach to AI. So if you're sitting there thinking, oh, we probably need one of those, that's exactly the type of support that we can provide you with. A few golden rules to remember. Think before you prompt, protect confidential information, verify before you trust, remember that humans remain accountable, and use AI ethically, legally, and responsibly. The verify before you trust is critical. We have had a few clients who have relied on AI to update their policies, but found that they've not reflected current legislation. Don't trust it blindly. And we're definitely not obsolete when it comes to AI. This is one of my favourite sayings around AI. AI supports decisions, but people make them. If you've forgotten everything else I've said today, I'd love you to remember just this one slide. AI is an incredibly powerful assistant, but it's not your HR manager. It's not your line manager, and it's certainly not your employment tribunal. The accountability never, ever sits with AI. It sits with the manager, the HR professional, and ultimately the employer. I've got one last little poll for you to do, please. Now that we've gone through a range of risks, is there any one risk that is worrying you the most? I'll give you a moment to respond. Is it data protection, discrimination, managers relying on AI too much, employers using AI against the business, or perhaps you don't know yet? Looks like data protection's winning out on that one. Can understand why. And hopefully this webinar has helped answer and address some of those issues that you can then convey to your teams. Thank you for everybody who's responded to that. Now, I couldn't resist asking AI to generate an image of someone feeling negative about AI, and hats off to it. This is what it came up with. I think it's rather good. Bit of fun. And this leads me to our final segment today, where I'd like to take you through a real life case study that we dealt with only a few weeks ago. The organisation announced to their small team of 10 employees that they were going to provide everyone some training in AI. They said they would get them to use AI to generate an email and a letter to give them an idea on how they could use it to improve their writing and to help them in their jobs. That sounds pretty innocuous, right? Wrong. One employee vehemently objected to it and made a point about not attending the training, and to quote, they were a conscientious objector to AI, that AI conflicted with their ethical beliefs, and that attending the training would compromise their personal values. I mean, I have to say, honestly, when I heard our advisor talking about this, I was astounded. I immediately thought about the Industrial Revolution and how farm labourers and factory hands might have felt the same way, seeing technology take their jobs and ruin their livelihoods. But ultimately, you can't stop the tide of progress. So my first instinct, and maybe slightly embarrassingly, was that they were just being troublesome. They were agitating for the sake of it, and it was a load of baloney. My first instinct. So here's a question for you, and you can pop it in the chat if you like the answer, or just think about what your response would be, either or. If you were their manager, would you still require them to attend the training if that's the response that you got from an employee? Have a think about it. What would you do? Next question. Same thing. Pop in the chat if you like, if you don't mind sharing. Otherwise, just have a think about it. Would you compromise rather and say, okay, you still need to come to the training, but you don't have to participate in the training? Anybody prefer that option? And lastly, this question. Or would you think, this sounds like the start of a potential problem, and seek advice? Now, from us, of course, not AI. Thankfully, that is what this client did. Now, the fact of the matter is that this particular client, a bit like my initial reaction, did not have much tolerance for the employee's response. Their view was, we've introduced AI training, it's a reasonable management instruction, the employee has refused, that's misconduct. Let's start disciplinary action. Now, at first glance, that sounds logical. But we, and I actually use that term very loosely, our senior Sintra HR advisor, encouraged them to pause, thankfully, and ask one more question. Why were they refusing? They listened to the advice, they did, and this is what the employee came back with. The environmental impact of AI is enormous. The amount of water required to cool AI data centers is unsustainable and contributes to climate change. I don't believe I should be required to support or promote something that causes this level of environmental harm. Wow. So now it goes into different territory, and it's a completely different conversation, because the issue is no longer simply refusing a management instruction. It's potentially about why they are refusing. So why does that matter? Because under the Equality Act 2010, religion or belief is a protected characteristic. And that doesn't just mean religious beliefs. It can also include certain philosophical beliefs, provided they meet the legal criteria of a philosophical belief. And those criteria are there. They must be genuinely held. They must be more than an opinion or viewpoint based on current information. They need to relate to a weighty and substantial aspect of human life and behavior, attain a certain level of cogency, seriousness, cohesion, and importance, be worthy of respect in a democratic society and not conflict with the rights of others. Now, I'm not saying this belief would automatically succeed. Only an employment tribunal can ultimately decide that. But there is a credible argument that a genuinely held environmental belief of this nature could satisfy those criteria. And let's just look at those again. We've already seen tribunals increasingly recognise sincerely held beliefs about climate change and environmental responsibility as capable of protection, depending on the facts of the case. So imagine if the employer in this case study had gone straight to dismissal. What might have happened? The employee could potentially argue that they had been treated unfavourably because of the protected philosophical belief. Instead of defending an ordinary misconduct dismissal, the employer could suddenly be defending a discrimination claim. And that's a very different level of legal risk. Unlike ordinary unfair dismissals, as you all probably know, there's no cap on compensation for discrimination. Compensation can include injury to feelings as well as financial loss. Reputational consequences can be significant. And of course, let's not mention the management time and legal costs, which can also be very substantial. And all because nobody paused to ask one simple question: why? And here's the thing. I am sure that if the employer had put their case to AI, with their preferred outcome being dismissal, AI would have given them advice that took them straight down that route. And for me, that's one of the biggest lessons from today's session. AI wouldn't necessarily identify the legal issue. The policy didn't identify the legal issue. The disciplinary procedure didn't identify the legal issue. A curious HR professional did. Because ultimately, good HR isn't about jumping to conclusions. It's about asking the next and the right question. Now, as it happens, a big collective sigh of relief, the employee in question actually resigned soon after this, so there was nothing further to do. However, it does bring up the idea that this is likely not going to be an isolated issue. I am sure we will see more of this in the future. I can almost guarantee it. So how would you respond? In this circumstance, I think it'd be important and relevant to have a conversation with the objecting employee and communicate that attending training does not compel them to agree with the subject matter. You can attend training on a whole range of things and not personally endorse it. But whilst you can understand their viewpoint, the reality is that AI in the workplace is becoming a business necessity. And to counteract some of the negative environmental concerns, can you as a business boost your environmental commitment in other ways, just as an idea? Here are a few green ideas to promote. If you have people who consider the impact on the environment, this might help offset, so that whilst you understand that there's an environmental impact, these are the positive environmental things that you as a business are doing. So some of them are very simple and quick to implement, others might incur greater costs, but that's just some ideas and may appease some of your employees if they see that you're genuinely making an attempt, if that's a concern for them. And perhaps a shout out for how AI is contributing positively to our environment. And again, in the spirit of complete transparency, this is what I asked AI for. So we'll take it with a pinch of salt, shall we? But certainly things like reducing travel, having meetings online is a huge benefit. Using AI to plan travel routes is widely used in logistics now, and again, saving on substantial fuel usage. So there are some very tangible things that AI is contributing to that have a positive impact on our environment. So as we near the end of today's webinar, and I can't believe I'm actually on time again, I don't know, I'm making a great habit of this, we'll end with a suggested action plan. And that's, I think, review how your managers are using AI. Decide on the tools that you want to approve in your business. Definitely introduce an AI policy. If you don't have one, please speak to us. Train employees on the safe use of AI, and review your recruitment process if they involve AI to make sure that you don't have that level of discrimination and that every decision is a human one. And a final word. AI isn't replacing HR, but it is changing what great HR looks like. Now, I'd just like to say thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you've got something useful from this session. We've only got a minute or two, so probably no time for questions now. But if you have questions, please email that address on the slide and I will certainly respond. Our next webinar is scheduled on the 18th of August, and it'll be on preparing for the new provisions around trade unions. So even if you've never had to deal with unions before, it will be really useful to understand what your responsibilities are. So hopefully you can join me for that. Until then, stay safe and well, and goodbye from me. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye.